Now on Critical Issue, we're looking at the effect of social media and how it has on political campaigns, plus the influence it has on Washington. Also, the budget battle in America, is it over? And Palestine's bid for statehood. Hello and welcome. We're going to talk to our round table, and I want to welcome first Iona's own Professor David Cundy of the Mass Communications Department. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you.
We have Chris Massaro, ICTV News Chief Political Correspondent, and Kenny Reichman, a freshman here at Iona, who's making his second appearance here on Critical Issue. Hello and welcome to Critical Issue. I'm Richard Giacobas, your host and moderator for today. All right, social media, folks, in itself is all around us. Most of us can't even go a day looking at Twitter or Facebook. But in the previous election and in modern politics, social media has a huge impact on the political world. But is this for the better or worse? We're going to start with Professor Cundy. What do you think social media has done for politics, Professor?
Well, first, Richard, let me just say that I'm going to be kind of complicated today in terms of my analysis of social media. And so the issue with social media is how it impacts issues of anonymity, privacy, intellectual property, and censorship. And as we look at those issues, social media is really evolving. The bad news for politics is that social media have actually been used to bring more politicians down than to bring them up, it seems. And it turns out that social media is an equal opportunity destroyer. Both Democrats and Republicans have fallen victim to their foibles. Alan Weiner, most recently a Democrat, and prior to him, a couple of Republicans, including a representative from Florida, Mark Foley. I don't need to talk about those subjects, but I'll get into a little bit further some of the aspects of social media here in the United States. And I know that Chris, even though the subject I think seems to be local, Chris wants to talk a little bit about the international impact of social media. So I'll turn.
Well, when we look at the Arab Spring, I mean, one of the major factors that led to the fall of these regimes was social media. We look at Tunisia, we look at Libya, Egypt, even in Saudi Arabia, everyone was trying to get on Facebook to vent about their political situation because they don't have freedom of expression, so they look to the internet. And in a lot of these instances, the regime felt that that was a major threat to their power, so they tried to shut it down. In some places, it was more successful than others. But and Facebook also led to a lot of rallies. In Egypt, people actually went to Facebook to see when there would be gatherings in Tahrir Square. So that, which eventually led to the fall of Mubarak. So it could really have effect on revolutionary change.
Right. Professor, how does, if you're looking at social media, is it affecting people when it comes to voting, especially, election day is, for presidential elections, is a year from November?
Well, I have some concerns that social media is overblown. One thing that Chris was challenged during the Arab Spring, specifically in Egypt, was the fact that in the real world, it's actual public demonstrations and actual public activities that are the only thing that really count. Yeah. The fact that people are communicating in Facebook doesn't really amount to a hill of beans compared with the fact that people are on the streets. I have no doubt that if you look at a current local example of social media here in the United States, which is the Occupy Wall Street demonstration that's occurring right now, that is heavily, there are heavy communications within social media about it. But that wouldn't really have any impact on people's awareness of the demonstration, were it not for the fact that there are hundreds or perhaps thousands of people down in Wall Street who are involved in the demonstration today.
So you're saying that social media has an effect, and that's why people are protesting?
It may have an organizing effect, but the fact is, if it wasn't for the people who were really protesting for real in Egypt, and the guys that had real guns in Libya, those revolutions would not have occurred.
But it's a good starting point to organize yourself, say, okay, this is where they're going to be, let's join.
What about its immediacy, and is there any positive to that as far as getting the news out immediate? Immediacy used to be television news, but it may be that internet is now taking over for that, the immediacy of going online and going onto Twitter and getting, news right away?
Well, one thing I'd like to do in our conversation today is define what social media are. And we define them fairly broadly, and the best term I would use is simply to say internet, because social media could include websites. Social media could include YouTube channels, Facebook pages, and Twitter. Those are the four primary ways in which we define social media. But, for example, Huffington Post or the Drudge Report, you can respond to postings, and so people make comments. Frequently, those comments are actually hierarchical, and so the comments that are most recommended are the ones that are elevated, escalated to the top, and therefore are made most readable. So when you look at social media, you could even say that the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times are social media in that people are allowed to make comments that other people are allowed to respond to. I think when we talk about social media today, we're primarily talking about Facebook and Twitter. And when you talk about Facebook, Facebook is terrific for fundraising, it's terrific for organizing, but Facebook is in the process of evolving in a way that is highly unpolitical. And what I mean by that is Facebook is now evolving into a commercial environment. In fact, it may be that when it comes to Facebook, that Facebook may turn into simply a voluntary opt-in marketing environment, which is completely unlike what the people who've been participating, that is you young people, have thought you signed up for. And that's another conversation.
Kenny, both Google and Facebook now have offices in Washington. So is it possible now that that's going to have an impact on the political scene?
No, without a doubt. A lot of politicians are moving towards Facebook with the campaign pages and things where people can go and check on the information that the campaigner or the politician has to say. And it's a lot easier to access because, like we were saying, a billion people have Facebook, a billion people have a Twitter. It makes their information a lot more accessible, and a lot of people are going to go to their sites to see it.
In your opinion, do you think that the candidates running for political office, is social media to their advantage?
Yes. Obviously, if they keep themselves under a strict amount of rules, if they go doing inappropriate things, then people are going to find out because of social media.
I would respectfully disagree, Kenny. I think that one of my colleagues' experiences last year during the political campaigns, Dr. Kelso was involved in two political campaigns. One was with an incumbent. We know that in the United States, incumbents have a 90+% chance of being reelected. And in fact, the incumbent that he represented did not want to participate in social media, did not want to communicate, because they felt that anything they communicated would reduce their chances of being reelected. So their choice, their approach was actually to not communicate. The other thing I want to say about social media that's really important is that it is very much a two-edged sword, because if you set up a political website and I'm a detractor, I can actively participate, and many do. And so what happens with politicians is they'll say things and people don't like them. They'll find that they're getting fairly well slammed on their. So it turns out that social media websites that are not broadcast based, that is one-sided communications, are highly risky. And so we saw that with for example, the Gap logo, when Gap redesigned their logo recently, and all the customers went crazy. And so they apologized and went back to their old logo.
Their old one.
And the same thing can happen to politicians. You say the wrong thing, and people will be all over you for it. So I think that social media do actually represent a dangerous environment for politicians.
You said risky. Well, Facebook recently just formed a political action committee. They said that they're going to use it to give cash to candidates. So obviously you feel there's issues with that.
Well, I think actually you've raised a point that I wanted to make, which is one of the recent news headlines, and Chris, you may have seen it, is that Obama now President Obama has now experienced a large drop-off in small donors, which typically occurs through the Facebook social type media environment, PayPal, that kind of thing. And it's because, it said that it's because the small donors have been disillusioned with Obama that they are now reducing their support for him. So as I say, I think that's a good example of the point I was making a moment ago about how this is actually a two-edged sword. You can have it, but it becomes very metric and it becomes available to the journalistic community if your numbers are dropping.
You want to weigh in on that, Chris?
Well, it's true. I think it just reflects President Obama's loss in popularity. I mean, he's losing a lot of support from his main base, labor unions, people that are disenfranchised over the war, and that he's not spending enough money. So he's losing a core base that he had in 2008, which is going to affect his re-election campaign.
And speaking of Obama, seems like every other month now we're revisiting the issue of a possible government shutdown. Recently this week, government funding was extended to November. It seems that we only keep putting Band-Aids on these wounds, Chris. So what does the U.S. need to do to create a preeminent fix to the budget?
They have to basically sit down and say, we're not going to spend any more money. We're not going to keep printing money. We're not going to keep borrowing money. They need to dramatically cut spending, at least to the 2000 levels when, you know, we weren't spending more money than we take in. That's the main problem. I mean, to simplify it as best as I can, because I'm not an economics major or expert, you can't spend more money than you take in. We take in about $2 trillion in taxes, or income taxes, I think, and then we spend over $3 trillion.
Well,
which leaves you with a deficit.
If a government shutdown did happen, Kenny, obviously, what does it mean?
I mean, what else could go wrong? We've, over the last how many years,
Well, I should phrase that as, what should it mean for Obama?
What should it mean
Not
for
us,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, besides his approval rating being in the mid-40s now, it'll be in the mid-20s by the time that's done.
Not necessarily. Clinton experienced a shutdown, and he was reelected. But, I mean, I think it's a little bit more hostile right now.
Economic prosperity during that time was fantastic. Look at us now.
Actually, that's not true. In 1994, the U.S. was at sort of the nadir of that depression. It was in the process of just about coming out. But I think the point was that Clinton wasn't blamed.
Right, it was a Republican
and right
Congress.
now, it's not clear who will be blamed for the shutdown. There are arguments that have been made on both sides.
Well, that's true. Well, if government programs, which government programs would be most in need of spending cutbacks? Anybody can weigh in on this if they want.
Well, I think it starts in the military. I mean, we're starting to pull out from Iraq and Iran right now.
Afghanistan,
excuse me, sorry. And we know one of the GOP candidates right now, Rick Perry, would like to put boots on the ground in Texas to stop the immigration. And instead of building a fence like most of the other candidates, he'd like to use the military spending from the Middle East, to Texas. And it's just not bright. I mean, we're spending a lot of money in the Middle East right now on the military, and we really should draw back